Somewhere tonight, someone is swiping through a dating app, rejecting a stranger because of one bad photo. They'd be completely unrecognizable to almost every single one of their ancestors. For most of the roughly 300,000 years modern humans have existed, nobody swiped on anybody. Your parents didn't ask what you were looking for. Nobody cared about your hobbies, your star sign, or your six pack. A committee, usually made up of people who weren't you, looked at two family trees, some livestock, and maybe a set of star charts, and decided your entire future in an afternoon. And here's the part that should really stop you. Researchers studying marriage across cultures have found that some form of arranged, family negotiated pairing shows up in roughly 85% of documented human societies. Not the exception, the overwhelming rule. So, how did it actually work? What did ancient people actually look for in a spouse, if not love? Stick around, because the real answer runs through cows, contracts, kidnapping, astrology, and, more often than you'd expect, genuine aching romance, hiding inside systems that were never built for it. Rewind about 50,000 years. You're living in a hunter-gatherer band, and most of these bands numbered somewhere between 20 and 50 people. Look around that circle. Half of them are your siblings, your cousins, your aunts and uncles. There is, quite simply, nobody here for you to marry. This is the very first problem marriage as an institution ever had to solve. Not romance, not happiness, but genetics and survival. A population that only breeds within itself collapses within a few generations. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies believe arranged, family-negotiated pairing of some kind stretches back at least 50,000 years, to the earliest human migrations out of Africa. The solution bands landed on was simple and brilliant. Meet other bands. Seasonal gatherings at river crossings, migration routes, and watering holes brought multiple groups together for weeks at a time. And it's here that marriages were arranged between bands rather than within them. Researchers call this pattern exogamy, literally, marrying outward. And once you cross into another band, you're not being chosen for your personality. Studies of these practices suggest early exchanges frequently involved something economists now call bride service, a young man working for his future wife's family for a period of time before the marriage was finalized. Or an exchange of goods altogether, the earliest form of what we now call bride price. One analysis of hunter-gatherer societies found some version of these economic exchanges present in as many as 80% of the group studied. In other words, before there was love, there was leverage. A man needed something to offer: labor, meat, tools, skill. Because a family wasn't handing over a daughter for nothing. They were handing over a piece of their own survival network. Fast forward tens of thousands of years to ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, then Babylon, one of the very first true civilizations on Earth. And here, marriage stops being an informal exchange between bands and becomes something startlingly modern, a legal contract. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest surviving law codes in human history, spells out marriage in remarkable detail. What a bride price should look like. What happens to it if the marriage ends? What a dowry protects. According to research on the ancient world, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Hebrews, and, on the other side of the planet, the Aztecs and the Incas, all independently developed some version of bride price as a foundation of marriage. Here's the twist people usually get wrong. This wasn't a purchase of a person. It was closer to a bond, a formal seal on an alliance between two households. The groom's family paid it to demonstrate seriousness and secure the union. The bride's family, in many cases, sent her into the marriage with a dowry of her own, property that legally remained hers, a kind of built-in insurance policy if things went wrong. For an average young man in this world, picking a wife meant something closer to watching your father negotiate a deal for months, then meeting your actual bride around the time the contract was finalized. Sometimes you'd never spoken to her before your wedding day. And yet, real letters survive from this era. Husbands writing to wives with obvious affection. Complaints about being apart. Small human tenderness tucked inside a system built almost entirely around property and alliance. Arranged did not have to mean loveless. It just meant love if it arrived after the paperwork, not before it. Now travel to ancient Egypt, because this is where the pattern breaks in a genuinely fascinating way. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt had no religious marriage ceremony at all, no priest, no temple vows. A couple was simply considered married once they began living together and presenting themselves as partners. And the love poetry that survives from this era, some of it well over 3,000 years old, reads almost exactly like a modern love song. Sleepless nights, obsessive longing, teasing between lovers, desire spoken about completely openly. Researchers studying ancient Egyptian marriage note that Egyptian women retained significant legal control over their own property inside a marriage. the ability to run a business, own land, bring a lawsuit in her own name, a level of independence historians say was unusually high for the ancient world. That said, and this part rarely makes it into the romantic version of the story, family involvement never disappeared entirely. Comparative studies of ancient Egyptian marriage customs note that personal choice in partner selection was still often limited, particularly for young women, and that marrying within the extended family, especially between cousins, was common and even preferred, since it kept property and inheritance inside a single bloodline. Some analyses suggest roughly 1 in 5 ancient Egyptian marriages were between cousins, specifically for this reason. So Egypt wasn't a total love-driven paradise, but compared to almost every other civilization in this story, there was real room for a man and woman to want each other and to say so without hiding it. That window didn't stay open everywhere. Travel now to Athens, one of the most celebrated civilizations in human history, birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and theater. And ask a young Athenian woman who she's going to marry. It's not her question to answer. Historical research on Greek marriage customs consistently notes that the bride's father negotiated the terms of the marriage directly with the groom's family. The Greeks, unlike the Romans who came after them, built their marriage system almost entirely around parental arrangement rather than personal choice. Brides were commonly between 14 and 16 years old. Grooms were typically in their 20s or 30s. For the groom here, choosing a wife looked far more like due diligence than romance. The size of the dowry, the reputation of the family, whether both of her parents were citizens, since that determined whether their children could inherit full citizenship. Marriage in Athens functioned, first and foremost, as a way to create political allies and uphold the existing social order. And yet, this is the part worth sitting with. The exact same culture that invented democratic participation for citizens gave essentially none of that participation to women in the single decision that would define the rest of their lives. Rome inherited nearly everything from Greece, and then gradually changed one crucial detail. Historical comparisons of Greek and Roman marriage customs highlight a striking difference. While Greek marriages were built around parental arrangement, Roman tradition, at least by the height of the Republic, required the bride and groom to exchange vows in front of witnesses. And Roman law increasingly treated the couple's own consent as a genuine legal requirement, not merely their father's agreement. Roman poets took full advantage of this shift. Guides on flirtation, seduction, and letter writing survive from this era, treating courtship almost as a competitive art form. But don't mistake this for modern romance. Marriage among Rome's elite was still overwhelmingly a tool for consolidating wealth and political alliance. What changed wasn't the underlying calculation families were making. It was the paperwork. For the first time in this story, the two people actually being married had to say yes, out loud, on the record. Travel east now, to ancient and Imperial China, where personal choice recedes even further into the background. Marriage here, historians note, was fundamentally about continuing the family line. A value system that first took clear shape roughly 3,600 years ago and persisted, largely unchanged in its basic logic, for millennia. Marriages were arranged by parents, often through a professional matchmaker, and formalized through an elaborate multi-step ritual process. An auspicious date chosen for the initial proposal, a negotiation over the bride price and gifts, and finally the wedding itself, where, in the older traditions, the couple exchanged tea rather than rings, and the bride's family symbolically returned a portion of the bride price as a gesture of goodwill. A young man might never speak to his future wife before the wedding day. His role wasn't to choose, it was to trust that his parents and the matchmaker had chosen correctly on his behalf. Step back now and look at everything you've just heard, side by side. Prehistoric bands, Mesopotamian contracts, Egyptian love poems, Athenian negotiations, Roman consent laws, Chinese matchmakers. Underneath every single one of these systems, researchers who study the history of marriage keep finding the same handful of forces at work over and over across completely unconnected civilizations. Economics. Could this family offer land, livestock, labor, or trade connections? Alliance. Would this marriage strengthen a bond between families, clans, or even nations? Fertility and survival. Could this person realistically build and sustain a family? Reputation. Did the name attached to this person carry honor or carry risk? And only sometimes often last through attraction. Did the people actually getting married want each other? Romantic love wasn't invented in the modern era. The poetry from Egypt alone proves that beyond doubt. But for most of human history, for most people, love was the icing. Survival, alliance, and family continuity were the cake. The idea that you should marry for love, and that love should come first, is one of the youngest ideas in this entire story. As the dominant Western ideal, it's genuinely only 2 to 300 years old, a blink compared to the 50,000 year span we just walked through. And in large parts of the world today, family arranged and family guided marriage remains not a historical relic, but the living, current norm. That doesn't make ancient people less capable of love. If anything, it makes it more remarkable that, squeezed between economics, alliance, and survival, real affection kept finding room to grow anyway. In letters, in poetry, in quiet moments no contract ever accounted for. Every single relationship in this story, bought with a cow, sealed with a scroll, negotiated by a matchmaker, or simply quietly fallen into, succeeded in doing the one thing history actually needed it to do. It survived long enough to produce the next generation, and the next, and the next, unbroken, for thousands of years, until one of those generations became you. So next time a modern dating app profile feels exhausting to write, remember, at least nobody's father is negotiating your bride price with a cow standing in the room. If you found this deep dive into the real history of ancient marriage interesting, subscribe for more.